Francois Duvalier, also known as Papa Doc, was the Haitian politician of French Martiniquan descent who served as the president of Haiti from 1957 to 1971. He was elected president in the 1957 general election on a populist and black nationalist platform. After thwarting a military coup d'etat in 1958, his regime rapidly became more autocratic and despotic. An undercover government death squad, the Tonton Macoute, indiscriminately killed Duvalier's opponents. The Tonton Macoute was thought to be so pervasive that Haitians became highly fearful of expressing any form of dissent even in private. Duvalier further sought to solidify his rule by incorporating elements of Haitian methodology into a personality cult. Prior to his rule, Duvalier was a physician by profession. He graduated from the Graduate School of Public Health at the University of Michigan on a scholarship that was meant to train black doctors from the Caribbean to take care of African American servicemen during the World War II. Due to his profession and expertise in the medical field, he acquired the nickname Papa Doc. He was anonymously re-elected in a 1961 presidential election in which he was the only candidate. Afterwards, he consolidated his power step by step, culminating in 1964 when he declared himself president for life after another sham election, and as a result, he remained in power until his death in April 1971. He was succeeded by his son John Claude, who was also nicknamed the Baby Doc. Duvalier was born in Port-au-Prince in 1907, the son of Duval Duvalier, a justice of the peace, and Becca Ulcia Abraham. His aunt, Madame Forrestal, raised him. He completed a degree in medicine from the University of Haiti in 1934 and served as staff physician at several local hospitals. He spent a year at the University of Michigan studying public health, and in 1943 became active in the United States-sponsored campaign to control the spread of contagious tropical diseases, helping the poor to fight typhus, yaws, malaria, and other tropical diseases that had ravaged Haiti for years. His patients affectionately called him Papa Doc, a moniker that he used throughout his life. The racism and violence that occurred during the United States occupation of Haiti, which began in 1915, inspired black mountain nationalism among Haitians and left a powerful impression on the young Duvalier. He was also aware of the latent political power of the poor black majority and their resentment against the small mulatto, black and white mixed race elite. Duvalier supported Pan-African ideals and became involved in the negritude movement of Asian author Jean Prismas, both of which led to his advocacy of Haitian voodoo, an ethological study of which later paid enormous political dividends for him. In 1938, Duvalier confronted the journal Les Griots on 27 December 1939. He married Simone Duvalier, with whom he had 4 children: Marie Denise, Nicole, Simone, and John Claude. In 1946, Duvalier aligned himself with President Dumaris Estime and was appointed Director General of the National Public Health Service. In 1949, he served as Minister of Health and Labor, but when Duvalier opposed Paul Magloire's 1950 coup d'etat, he left the government and resumed practicing medicine. His practice included taking part in the campaigns to prevent yaws and other diseases. In 1954, Duvalier abandoned medicine, hiding out in Haiti's countryside from the Magloire regime. In 1956, the Magloire government was failing, and although still in hiding, Duvalier announced his candidacy to replace him as president. By December 1956, an amnesty was issued and Duvalier emerged from hiding, and on 12 December 1956, Magloire conceded defeat. The two frontrunners in the 1957 campaign for the presidency were Duvalier and Louis de Jol, a landowner and an industrialist from the north. During their campaigning, Haiti was ruled by 5 temporary administrations, none lasting longer than a few months. Duvalier promised to rebuild and renew the country, and ruler Haiti supported him as did the military. He resorted to Noriste populism, stoking the majority of Afro-Asians' irritation at being governed by the few mulatto elite, which is how he described his opponent De Jole. Francis Duvalier was elected president on 22nd September 1957. Duvalier received 679,884 votes to De Jole's 266,992. Even in this election, however, there are multiple first-hand accounts of voter fraud and voter intimidation. After being elected president in 1957, Duvalier exiled most of the major supporters of the Joey. He had a new constitution adopted that year. Duvalier promoted and installed members of the black majority in the civil service and the army. In July 1958, 3 exiled Haitian army officers and 5 American mercenaries landed in Haiti and tried to overthrow Duvalier, and all were killed. Although the army and its leaders had quashed the coup attempt, the incident deepened Duvalier's distrust of the army, an important Asian institution over which he did not have the firm control. He replaced the chief of staff with a more reliable officer and then proceeded to create his own power base within the army by turning the presidential guard into an elite corps aimed at maintaining his power. After this, Duvalier dismissed the entire general staff and replaced it with officers who owned their position and their loyalty to him. In 1959, Duvalier created a rural militia, the Milice de Volontaires de la Sécurité de la Nationale (MVSN), English Militia of National Security Volunteers, commonly referred to as the Tonton Macoute, after the Haitian Creole boogeyman, to extend the bolster support for the regime in the countryside. The Macoute, which by 1961 was twice as big as the army, never developed into a real military force, but was more than just a secret police. In the early years of his rule, Duvalier was able to take advantage of strategic weaknesses of his powerful opponents, mostly from the mulatto elite. These weaknesses included their inability to coordinate their actions against the regime, whose power has grown increasingly stronger. In the name of nationalism, Duvalier expelled almost all of the Haiti's foreign-born bishops, an act that earned him excommunication from the Catholic Church. In 1966, he persuaded the Holy See to allow him permission to nominate the Catholic era chief for Haiti. Duvalier now exercised more power in Haiti than ever. On 24th May 1959, Duvalier suffered a massive heart attack, possibly due to an insulin overdose. He had been a diabetic since early adulthood and also suffered from heart disease and associated circulatory problems. During the heart attack, he was comatose for 9 hours. His physicians believed that he had suffered neurological damage during these events, harming his mental health and perhaps explaining his subsequent actions. While recovering, Duvalier left power in the hands of Clement Babout, leader of the Tonton Macoute. Upon his return to work, Duvalier accused Babout of trying to supplant him as president and had him imprisoned. In April 1963, Babout was released and began plotting to remove Duvalier from office by kidnapping his children. The plot failed and Duvalier then ordered a nationwide search for Babout and his fellow conspirators. During his search, Duvalier was told that Babout had transformed himself into a black dog, which prompted Duvalier to order that all black dogs in Haiti to be put to death. The Tonton Macoute captured and killed Babout in July 1963. In other incidents, Duvalier ordered the head of an executed rebel packed in ice and brought to him so he could commune with the dead man's spirit. Pupils were carved into the walls of the interrogation chambers, to which Duvalier watched Asian detainees being tortured and submerged in baths of sulfuric acid. Sometimes he was in the room during the torture. In 1961, Duvalier began violating the provisions of the 1957 Constitution. First, he replaced the bicameral legislature with an unicameral body. Then he called a new presidential election in which he was the sole candidate. Though his term was to expire in 1963 and the Constitution prohibited the election was flagrantly leaked. The official tally showed a total of 1.3 million votes, yes votes, for another term for Duvalier, with none opposed. Upon hearing the results, he proclaimed, "I accept the people's will. As a revolutionary, I have no right to disregard the will of the people." The New York Times commented, Latin America has witnessed many fraudulent elections throughout its history, but none has been more outrageous than one which has just taken place in Haiti. On 14 June 1964, a constitutional referendum made Duvalier president for life, a title previously held by 7 Haitian presidents. This referendum was also blatantly rigged. An implausible 99.9% voted in favor, which should have come as no surprise since all the ballots were pre-marked yes. The new document granted Duvalier, or the sovereign as he was called, absolute powers as well as the right to name his successor. Foreign relations. His relationship with the United States proved difficult. In his early years, Duvalier rebuked the United States for its friendly relations with Dominican dictator Rafael Trujillo, assassinated in 1961 while ignoring Haiti. The Kennedy administration 1961 to 1963 was particularly disturbed by Duvalier's repressive and totalitarian rule and allegations that he misappropriated aid money. At the time, a substantial part of the Haitian budget and a U.S. Marine Corps mission to train the Tonton Macoute, the U.S. thus halted most of its economic assistance in the mid-1962, pending stricter accounting procedures with which Duvalier refused to comply. Duvalier publicly renounced all aid from Washington on nationalist grounds, portraying himself as a principled and lonely opponent of the domination by a great power. Duvalier misappropriated millions of dollars of international aid, including the $15 million annually from the United States. He transferred this money to personal accounts. Another Duvalier's method of obtaining foreign money was to gain foreign loans, including $4 million from the Cuban dictator Fulgencio Batista. After the assassination of John F. Kennedy in November 1963, which Duvalier later claimed resulted from a curse that he had placed on Kennedy, the U.S. eased its pressure on Duvalier, grudgingly accepting him as the bulwark against communism. Duvalier attempted to exploit tensions between the U.S. and Cuba, emphasizing his anti-communist credentials and Haiti's strategic location as a means of winning U.S. support. Communism has established centers of infection. No area in the world is as vital to America's security as the Caribbean. We need a massive injection of money to reset the country on its feet, and this injection can come only from our great, capable friend and neighbor, the United States. After Fulgencio Batista, a friend of Duvalier, was overthrown in the Cuban Revolution, Duvalier worried that the new Cuban leader Fidel Castro will prove a safe haven for Haitian dissidents. Duvalier attempted to win Cuba over by recognizing Castro's government by sending medicine and pardoning several political prisoners, but to no avail. From the very start of his regime, Castro gave anti-Duvalier dissidents his full support. Duvalier enraged Castro by voting against the country in the Organization of American States (OAS) meeting and subsequently as the United Nations, where a trade embargo was imposed on Cuba. Cuba answered by breaking off diplomatic relations, and Duvalier subsequently instituted a campaign to rid Haiti of communists. This move severed Haiti relations with Cuba for 38 years until the two countries re-established relations in 1997. Duvalier's relationship with the neighboring Dominican Republic was always tense. In his early years, Duvalier emphasized the differences between the two countries. In April 1963, relations were brought to the edge of war by the political enmity between Duvalier and the Dominican President Juan Bosch. Bosch, a leftist, provided asylum and support to Haitian exiles who plotted against the Duvalier regime. Duvalier ordered his presidential guard to occupy the Dominican embassy in Pétionville with the goal of arresting Haitian army officer believed to be involved in the Babot's plot to kidnap Duvalier's children. The Dominican president reacted with outrage, publicly threatened to invade Haiti and ordered army units to the border. However, as Dominican military commanders expressed little support for an invasion of Haiti, Bosch refrained from the invasion and sought mediation through the OAS. In 1966, Duvalier hosted the Emperor of Ethiopia Haile Selassie I in what would be only visit of a foreign head of state to Haiti under Duvalier. During the visit, the two discussed bilateral agreements between the two nations as the economic shortcomings brought about by the international pressure. Duvalier awarded Haile Selassie the necklace of the Order of John Jacques Dessalines the Great and the Emperor. In turn, bestowed upon Duvalier the great necklace of the Order of the Queen of Sheba. Duvalier's government was one of the most repressive in the Western Hemisphere. Within the country, he murdered and exiled his opponents. Estimates of those killed are as high as 60,000. Attacks on Duvalier from within the military were treated as especially serious. When bombs were detonated near the presidential palace in 1967, Duvalier had 19 officers of the presidential guard executed in Fort Dimanche. A few days later, Duvalier gave a public speech during which he read the attendance sheet with the names of all 19 officers killed. After each name, he said absent. After reading the whole list, Duvalier remarked that all were shot. Haitian communists and even suspected communists bore the brunt of government's repression. Duvalier targeted them to reassure the US he was not a communist. Duvalier was exposed to communist and leftist ideas early in his life and rejected them. On 28 April 1969, Duvalier instituted a campaign to rid of Haiti all of communists. A new law declared that communist activities, no matter what their form, are hereby declared crimes against the security of the state. Those convicted of communist activity were subject to execution and faced having their property confiscated. Duvalier employed intimidation, repression, and patronage to supplant the old mulatto elites with the new elite of his own making. Corruption in the form of government write-offs of industries, bribery, extortion of domestic businesses, and stolen government funds enriched the dictator's closest supporters. Most of them had sufficient power to intimidate the members of the old elite who were gradually co-opted or eliminated. Many educated professionals fled Haiti for New York City, Miami, Montreal, Paris, and several French-speaking African countries, exacerbating an already serious lack of doctors and teachers. Some of the highly skilled professionals joined the ranks of several UN agencies to work in the development in newly independent nations such as Ivory Coast and the Congo. The government confiscated peasant land holdings and allotted them to members of the militia who had no official salary and made their living through crime and extortion. The dispossessed fled to the slums of the capital where they would find only meager incomes to feed themselves. Malnutrition and famine became endemic. Nonetheless, Duvalier enjoyed significant support from Haiti's majority black rural population, who saw him as a champion of their claims against the historical dominant mulatto elite. During his 14 years in power, he created a substantial black middle class, chiefly through the government patronage. Duvalier also initiated the development of Francois Duvalier Airport, also known as Toussaint Louverture International Airport. Duvalier fostered his cult of personality and claimed that he was a physical embodiment of the island nation. He also revived the traditions of voodoo, later using them to consolidate his power with his claim of being the voodoo priest himself. In an effort to make himself even more imposing, Duvalier deliberately modeled his image on that of Baron Samedi, on one of the Iwa or spirits of Haitian voodoo. He often donned sunglasses in order to hide his eyes and talked with the strong nasal tone associated with the Iwa. The regime propaganda stated that Papa Doc was one of the Iwa, Jesus Christ, and the God himself. The most celebrated image from the time shows a standing Jesus Christ with a hand on a shoulder of a seated Papa Doc, captioned, "I have chosen him." Duvalier declared himself an immaterial being as well as the Haitian flag as soon after his first election. In 1964, he published a catechism in which the Lord's Prayer was heavily rewarded to praise Duvalier instead of God. Duvalier also held in his closest the head of former opponent Blue Chap Philogenes, who tried to overthrow him in 1963. He believed another political enemy, Clement Babut, was able to change at will into a black dog and had a militia begin killing black dogs on sight in the capital. Francois Duvalier died of heart disease and diabetes on 21st April 1971, 7 days after his 64th birthday. His 19-year-old son, John Claude Duvalier, nicknamed Baby Doc, succeeded him as president.